On the most recent Koine Corner, we talked about the importance of verb tenses as they inform our understanding of what's happening with the action in Koine. Today we're going to look at the decline of words, which is not true. We're going to look at the declension of nouns. So nouns in Koine all have case, gender, and number. And we'll explain we'll cover what that means in depth in a few moments. But the nouns and the pronouns and the adjectives and the participles all have case, gender, and number. Let's look at what we're talking about here with some examples. Ho oranos. Ho oranos is in the nominative case. It is a masculine noun and it is singular and it means heaven. Tu doulou is in the genitive case. It is also a masculine noun. It is also singular and it means of the slave. And then tais synagogais is in the dative case. It's a feminine noun and it's plural, to, for, or in the synagogues. And then todoron is in the accusative case. It's a neuter noun and it is singular and means the gift. So let's talk about these cases a little more extensively. So the nominative case, roughly speaking, identifies the subject, either of the clause or the verb. The genitive case tends to show possession or some other relationship between nouns or substantives like pronouns or participles. The dative case tends to show the indirect object, and the accusative case identifies most of the time the direct object. Now, the genitive, dative, and accusative are sometimes used with prepositions that govern the choice of the case, and we'll see an example of that as we carry on. But let's talk about an English example that explains the functions that we're dealing with here. Subject, possession, indirect object, and direct object. So if I were to say to you, the man, that's the subject, walked, the verb, the dog, the direct object, the man walked the dog, right? The subject walked the direct object of his daughter. That would be a genitive of possession. Whose dog is it? It's his daughter's dog. In the park is kind of the indirect object, right? It's important for us to know the function of those nouns or we can't understand the relationships between them. So in Koine, the word order doesn't govern the relationships, where in English, by and large, the word order governs our understanding of the relationships. That and some prepositions and filler words. But in Koine, the case, gender, and number tell us how to decode the verse so we know what we're looking at. But remember, in Koine, word order doesn't govern the meaning. The case system does. So if I were to say to you in Koine, park, daughter, man, dog walked. Park, daughter, man, dog walked. You wouldn't know for sure whether is the daughter walking the man's dog? Is the man walking the daughter's dog? Is the dog walking the man's daughter? We don't know without those keys. But if we say, back to our English example, the man walked his daughter's dog in the park, it's crystal clear, right? In Greek, the cases, genders, and numbers are going to make it clear to us what the relationship between those are. So now let's take a look at this chart quickly and see how we understand, how we recognize them. So the first column, or I should really say the second column here, are masculine nouns. Hologos, the word, as the subject. Tu logu is of the word in the genitive case, singular. To logo is to or for the word in the dative case, singular. Ton logon is the word but as the direct object, whereas hologos was the word as the subject. Ton logon is the word as the direct object. The plurals, hoi logoi, the words as the subject. Ton logon, of the words in the genitive. Tois logois, two or four the words in the dative. Tous logus, the words as the direct object. The next column is feminine. We won't go through that. The shorter column is feminine with alpha endings rather than eta endings. Now let's look at the neuter column at the end because there's something important here. Notice to ergon, the work, is the same form in the nominative case and the accusative case. To ergon and to ergon. So the context will determine whether it's being used as the nominative or the accusative. Same with the plurals, ta erga and ta erga. But you have to know this paradigm, recognize the endings, and be familiar with your vocabulary so that you know whether you're dealing with masculine, feminine, or neuter nouns, and recognizing the endings so that you see whether it's being used as a nominative, a genitive, a dative, or an accusative. But wait, someone's saying, what about the vocative? The vocative's not in the list because the form that you almost always see is the singular, the vocative singular, and it tends to just have one form. It doesn't occur often enough for us to worry about it today. So the four cases that we're considering today: nominative for the subject, genitive for possession or other relationship, dative largely for the indirect object, and accusative for the direct object. So once you know the paradigm and you know your vocabulary, you can recognize how the word serves the sentence. So we're going to look at two examples today. The first up is John chapter 2, verse 1, where we read, Kai te hemera te trite. Let's stop right there and work through that. Kai is and, te hemera te trite. All four of those words are in the dative case. They're feminine and they're singular. How do I know? Because I recognize that eta in there is telling me that it's feminine in both the articles and in the endings, the alpha and in hemera and the trite and the eta in trite. These are feminine and they're singular. So kai and te hemera in two or four the day, hemera is day, and trite is third. So, and in or on the third day. All right, that sets the stage for us. And we know that it's in or on because it's in the dative case. Next word, gamos. Gamos is in the nominative case. How do I know? Because of the omicron sigma ending, and it means wedding. So in the third day, a wedding, egeneto. So gamos in the nominative case is the subject of the verb egeneto, was happening, from ginomai. And in the third day, a wedding was happening. Where was this wedding happening? En Cana. Cana is in the accusative case. It's a proper name. En is the preposition that requires that we use the accusative here. So in Cana, which Cana? Cana tes Galileas. Cana in the genitive, in the genitive case, tes Galileas, of Galilee. So if there are other towns known as Cana, there's the one that we're talking about is the one that belongs to Galilee. So what do we know so far? And in the third day, a wedding was happening in Cana of Galilee. Let's look at the last part of the verse. Kai ein, and he, she, or it was. What's the subject of this verb, he, she, or it was? He mater, in the nominative case, because I know the paradigm and I look at that article and I know that it is nominative singular. It's also a feminine noun, mother. Here, mater is mother. And the mother, which mother? Tu Jesu, in the genitive case of Jesus, ein, was, aka, there. So The whole thing put together, and in the third day, a wedding was happening in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. So without the case, genders, and numbers, it's difficult for us to know the relationships between these nouns. How do I know that it's not Galilee of Cana? Well, because clearly, en Cana, in Cana, tes Galileas tells me that it's in Cana of Galilee. Let's take a look at one more example quickly. This is Mark chapter 1, verse 12. Kaiuthas, and immediately. So immediately is an adverb, and we know that it's going to modify a verb later in the verse. Kaiuthos, and immediately. To pneuma, the Spirit. Now remember, when we were looking at the chart, I said that the neuter, the nominative neuter singular and the accusative neuter singular had identical forms. That's what we have here. To pneuma, the Spirit, is either nominative neuter singular or accusative neuter singular. We're going to have to figure out which it is. So kaiuthos, immediately, to pneuma, the Spirit. Then the next word is auton, him or it. And then the verb is ekbale. Ekbale is literally cast out. He, she, or it cast out. The question is, did the Spirit cast him out, or did he cast the Spirit out? How do we know? The context dictates it. Not in this verse, but in the previous verses, where the only possible him is Jesus, because the verses are talking about Jesus, and then we're told that the Spirit, to pneuma, ekbale, cast out, auton, him, and then we get the rest, eistain erimon, into the desert. The Spirit cast him out into the desert, or drove him out into the desert. How do we know that auton is him, the accusative and the direct object, and not it, the accusative direct object being in the neuter? Because Jesus is a man, and the proper pronoun for that man here in this case being driven out would be autos if he was the subject in the nominative, but it's auton because he's the direct object being cast out into the desert, into the wilderness. By whom? By to pneuma, the Spirit. In the nominative case, the subject. I know that's a little complex, but it's important to see how the context told us that auton here can't be the subject. It has to be the object, because the referent is Jesus, and if it were the subject, it would have to be autos, not auton. So, again, quickly, kaiuthos, and immediately, to pneuma, the Spirit, in the nominative case, the subject, ekbale, cast out. Cast out what? Auton, him. Eistain erimon, into the desert. Tain erimon is also in the accusative, and it's not the indirect object using the dative because the preposition eis demands that we have it in the accusative. But it is kind of the indirect object, right? Cast him out into the desert. So the cases, genders, and numbers of words matter. Why do they matter? Because they tell us who is doing what to whom, when, and where. That's how we understand the construction of the verse, the relationships of these nouns, adjectives, pronouns, participles, substantives that make up the content of the sentence. How do I know the subject of the verb and the object of the verb? Who cast whom out into the desert? How do I know that? Based on the case, gender, and number of the nouns and pronouns and adjectives, etc. It's super important, and it's part of what makes grammar great. So for those of you who, when you watch these videos, say, well, I don't need to know all that. It's true. if we were working in English or whatever your primary language is, you're so fluent in it, you don't need to think about it. But when we're studying a language in which we're not native speakers, it's important to see those things so that we can crack the code and understand how we can be certain of what's happening in the verse. Or at least, you can't always be certain, you can at least increase the likelihood of certainty in interpreting the verse, because we know that the nominative case most of the time is the subject, the accusative is the direct object, the genitive shows possession or other relationship, and the dative shows indirect objects or other kinds of relationships, sometimes governed by prepositions that demand the use of particular cases. So it tells us, why did he choose that? He chose it because of that preposition. Or he chose it to show that Jesus didn't go to the feast, to the wedding with his mother. The mother of Jesus was there. Then verse 2 tells us that Jesus and his disciples also went. Important stuff. Thanks for watching. Hope it was interesting. Hope the declension of nouns is not a mystery to you. If you're already someone studying the language of Koine, you're probably familiar with that noun chart. It's worth picking up so that when you see those words, you say, because of the article I know and the ending, I know that that is a genitive feminine plural, or that is an accusative neuter singular, etc., etc. Hope that was good for you. Look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, Charis Kai Reni Humin, grace and peace to you.